All right, so we're diving deep into welding safety and equipment today.
Sounds like a hot topic.
It is, literally. And we've got this great guide, Welding Safety and Equipment 101. And you know what? I'm really liking how visual it is.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, tons of pictures of the equipment. It'll really help us, picture what we're talking about.
Definitely helps to see the tools and the gear in action.
Totally. So let's say you're brand new to welding. What are the absolute must-knows to stay safe? This guide lays out 4 main things to learn.
Yeah, it's all about hazard identification, safe operating procedures, and then, of course, understanding your PPE.
Oh, and of course, all the different kinds of welding equipment. Can't forget that.
For sure. You got to have the right tools for the job, right?
Absolutely. And they're smart to start by really emphasizing just how risky welding can be. It's not about scaring anyone off, but respect for the power is key.
It's like, anything powerful, you got to know the dangers before you even think about using it.
Exactly. And speaking of dangers, they highlight 6 main ones. Fire, electrical shock, then there's those gas cylinders. Got to be careful with those.
Right. And can't forget about ventilation and the fumes.
And of course, got to have the right personal protective equipment.
And knowing how to use your tools the right way, keeping them in good shape.
So true. That's huge. They actually cover that twice in this guide.
No kidding.
Yeah, slides 7 and 9. Guess that shows how important it is. But let's start with fire. Seems like that's the hottest topic, literally. And they dive right into it.
Makes sense. I mean, you've got open flames, sparks flying. It's a recipe for disaster if you're not careful.
Yeah, and they make it clear no flammable stuff anywhere near your work area. But it's not just the obvious things, right?
No way. I mean, even dust, some cleaning solvents, those can be a fire hazard too.
Really? I wouldn't have thought about that.
Oh, yeah. And oily rags, flammable liquids.
Yeah.
You got to be super careful about what's stored nearby.
Makes you think about your whole workspace setup.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Everything
yeah.
needs to be fire safe.
Right. And what about fire extinguishers? Is there a specific kind you need for welding?
You bet. You want a Class D fire extinguisher, the kind that's designed for combustible metals.
Got it, Class D. So it's not just any old fire extinguisher?
Nope. You got to have the right one for the job, just like with any other tool.
They also mention fire-resistant blankets and curtains. Seems like a good extra layer of protection.
Oh, for sure. Especially if you're in a tight space or near anything flammable.
Right. Creating a barrier to contain those sparks and prevent them from spreading?
Exactly. It's all about minimizing the risk.
Absolutely. Oh, and they also say to inspect your equipment for leaks or damage. What should we be looking for there specifically?
Well, with your gas lines, you're looking for cracks, any wear and tear, and loose connections.
Right, because any of those could let that flammable gas escape.
Exactly. And with electrical equipment, you want to watch out for frayed wires, damaged insulation, anything that can spark a fire.
So it's not just about fire safety, it's about electrical safety too.
It's all connected, right? One hazard can easily lead to another.
Speaking of electrical safety, that's another hazard that might not be so obvious to a beginner.
It's easy to get mesmerized by that arc, all that light and heat.
Yeah.
But you got to remember, you're dealing with a powerful electrical current.
Yeah, it's easy to forget about the invisible danger.
And that's when accidents happen.
Right. It seems like a lot of those electrical safety procedures come down to grounding, right?
Oh, absolutely. Grounding is like the foundation of electrical safety.
So what's grounding, really? Why is it so important?
Well, basically, grounding gives that electrical current a safe path back to the source so it doesn't end up, flowing through you.
Ouch. Yeah. I don't want to be part of that circuit.
Nobody does. And good grounding also protects your equipment from damage.
So it's win-win situation.
For sure. And it's not that hard to do it right.
So how do you make sure everything's properly grounded? What should you be checking?
First thing, check your cables and connections. Make sure there are no frayed wires or anything exposed. And double check your welding machine is grounded and that clamp is on tight to your workpiece.
So it's all about those connections being solid.
Exactly. You
Yeah.
don't want any loose ends, literally.
And dry gloves, flame-resistant clothing, that's part of electrical safety too, right?
Yeah, they act as insulators.
So they kind of create a barrier between you and the current.
Exactly. But even with the gear, you still got to be extra careful when it's wet or damp.
Makes sense. Water and electricity don't mix.
Not a good combination.
Yeah.
Especially when you're dealing with the kind of power involved in welding.
Okay, let's talk about those gas cylinders. I've always been kind of nervous around them. They just seem like accidents waiting to happen.
I get it. They're big and heavy. They've got all that pressurized gas inside.
Yeah, one wrong move and it's like a bomb going off.
Well, it's not quite that dramatic, but you definitely got to treat them with respect.
The presentation mentions falling cylinders as a risk, which makes sense.
Oh, yeah, you definitely don't want one of those things tipping over on you, but it's not just about securing them.
Right. They talk about keeping those valves closed, storing flammable gases the right way, and inspecting those cylinders regularly.
All crucial steps. You got to treat those cylinders like they're loaded weapons.
Loaded with potential danger, for sure.
Absolutely. So what are we looking for when we inspect them, specifically?
Good question. What are those telltale signs that something's not right?
Well, you start with a visual inspection. Look for any dents, bulges, or corrosion. Then you got to check the valve, make sure it's working properly, and there are no leaks.
And I'm guessing we should double check the label to make sure we're using the right type of gas.
Absolutely. Using the wrong gas can be a recipe for disaster.
So it's more than just preventing the cylinder from falling. It's about understanding the hazards of the gas itself.
Right. Some gases can displace oxygen, which is obviously a big problem if you're in confined space.
Wow, I didn't realize it was that serious.
Oh, yeah. And some gases are flammable or corrosive. It's important to read those safety data sheets, the SDS, for each gas you're working with.
Okay, so treat those cylinders with respect, read the labels, and always check for leaks and damage.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Safety first, always.
All right, let's shift gears a bit and talk about something that might not seem as dramatic as fire or electrical shock, but it's just as important for your health: ventilation.
Ah, yes. Good airflow. Can't forget about that, especially when you've got all those fumes and gases floating around.
The presentation touches on it, but I'm curious to go a little deeper. What are the real risks with those welding fumes?
I mean, think about it. You've got metallic particles, gases, all sorts of byproducts in those fumes.
Not exactly the kind of stuff you want to be breathing in.
No way.
Yeah.
Short term, they can irritate your eyes, skin, lungs. Long term, you're talking lung damage, neurological problems, even cancer.
Wow, that's scary. So what are the best ways to protect yourself?
Good ventilation is key, obviously. You want to pull those fumes away from you as much as possible.
But sometimes ventilation isn't enough, right?
Right. That's where respiratory protection comes in.
So like respirators.
Exactly. Sometimes you need that extra layer of protection to really filter out those harmful particles and gases.
And I imagine the type of respirator you need depends on what you're welding and what kind of fumes it's creating.
Exactly. There's no one-size-fits-all solution. You got to choose the right respirator for the job, just like with any other tool.
This is all great information. I'm learning a lot.
Glad to hear it. The more you know about welding safety,
Oh yeah, on slide 10. Good point. Always good to go over the main points again.
right? Helps it stick.
Exactly. And they really hammer home that welding safety is, well, paramount.
Couldn't agree more.
They go over the hazards again, the PTE, keeping your equipment in good shape, all that.
All the essentials.
Right. But then they add this interesting point about, safety protocols aren't just for you, it's about everyone around you too.
Oh, yeah, the whole community aspect of it.
Exactly. It's like your actions affect other people too.
Totally, like a shared responsibility.
Exactly. And to really drive that point home, they end with a few questions. Kind of makes you think about everything we've been talking about.
Yeah, it gets those wheels turning.
All right, so let's put on our thinking caps. Question 1. What are the primary fire hazards associated with welding? Think we can handle that one.
Let's see. Sparks, obviously. Molten metal. Anything flammable lying around.
Oh, right, and even dust or certain cleaning solvents can be a fire hazard too.
Oh, yeah, can't forget about those. And stuff like oily rags or any flammable liquid stored nearby. Got to be mindful of the whole workspace.
So many things to consider.
For sure. Fire safety is no joke.
Okay, next question. How can you prevent electrical shock in a welding environment? What are the most important things to remember?
Let me think. Inspecting your equipment regularly, making sure everything's grounded properly.
Oh, and wearing those dry gloves and flame-resistant clothing.
Right. Can't forget those. They're like your personal force field against electrical shock.
So many layers of protection.
Exactly. It's all about minimizing the risk, right?
Absolutely. Okay, moving on. What are the key safety things to think about when you're handling those gas cylinders? Remember those big, heavy ones we talked about?
Got to make sure they're stored securely, valves closed when you're not using them, and double check that labeling. Oh, and regular inspections too.
Right. Can't forget those inspections. Got to be looking for any signs of damage or leaks.
Exactly. And make sure you understand the specific hazards of the gas you're using too.
Oh, and consult those safety data sheets, the SDS, for all the details.
Good point. Can't stress that enough.
All right, last question. Why is proper ventilation so important when you're welding? This one might be a bit less obvious, but it's just as crucial.
Yeah, this is all about those fumes and gases we talked about. Got to get those out of your breathing zone.
So good airflow is key.
Exactly. Sometimes just having good ventilation in your workspace is enough, but sometimes you need to step it up.
What do you mean?
Well, sometimes you need a respirator,
Hmm.
or a welding helmet with that built-in fume extraction system. Depends on the situation.
It's like those fumes are sneaky, you can't see them, but they can be just as dangerous as those sparks and flames.
Absolutely. Welding safety is not just about the immediate stuff, it's about protecting your long-term health, too.
Right. Thinking about the long game.
Exactly. Got to be smart about it.
Well, I think we did a pretty good job of covering the main points of this welding safety and equipment 101 thing.
Yeah, we hit all the highlights.
But this is really just the tip of the iceberg, right? There's a whole lot more to learn about welding if you really want to dive deep.
Oh, absolutely. It's a whole world out there.
Okay, before we move on, I want to get your perspective on something. We've talked a lot about the technical side of welding safety.
Yeah.
But what about the human element? What are some of those, I guess, less tangible factors that can make a difference in staying safe when you're welding?
Hmm. That's a good question. I think one of the biggest things is awareness.
Awareness.
Yeah, like being aware of your surroundings, your equipment, what you're doing. It's easy to get complacent,
Right.
especially when you're focused on a tricky weld or something.
I get it. You get in the zone and kind of forget about everything else.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But those moments of inattention, that's when accidents happen.
So it's like a constant state of alertness, being mindful of everything that's going on around you.
Right. Got to stay sharp out there.
Makes sense. What else?
Communication is huge, too.
Communication.
Yeah, like between welders, supervisors, everyone on the job site. Clear instructions, warnings if something seems off, that kind of thing.
So it's about creating a culture of safety where everyone feels comfortable speaking up.
Exactly. And that includes asking for help when you need it.
Oh, right. Not being afraid to say, hey, I'm not sure about this.
Exactly. Welding can be tough. And sometimes the safest thing you can do is ask for a second opinion or get some guidance from someone more experienced.
No shame in that.
None at all. It's all about working together to stay safe.
What about taking breaks? Is that important for safety too?
Oh, absolutely. Welding can be tiring physically and mentally. And when you get tired, you make mistakes.
So it's not just about pushing through and getting the job done.
No way. Got to listen to your body, take breaks when you need them, stay hydrated, that kind of thing.
It's like those breaks can actually make you more productive and safer in the long run.
Exactly. They give you a chance to clear your head, refocus, come back with renewed energy.
It's all about working smarter, not harder.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
I'm also curious about experience. Does having more experience make you a safer welder?
I mean, it definitely helps, but it's not a guarantee.
Mhm.
Experienced welders, they've seen more, they know what to watch out for, but they can also get complacent.
So it's not just about how many years you've been welding, it's about maintaining that safety mindset no matter what.
Right. You always got to be learning, staying up to date on the latest safety practices, and never be afraid to ask questions.
It's a continuous journey, isn't it?
It is. Welding's a challenging field, constantly evolving, and safety has got to be a top priority every step of the way.
Well said. Okay, as we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I want to leave our listeners with one final question to ponder.
All right, hit me with it.
We talked about choosing the right PPE, but what about the fit and comfort of that PPE? Does that matter?
Oh, that's a great point. You can have the most high-tech helmet in the world, but if it doesn't fit right or it's uncomfortable, you're not going to wear it properly.
Right, and if you're not wearing it properly, it's not doing its job.
Exactly. So when you're choosing your PPE, don't just look at the specs, make sure it fits you comfortably, and that you can wear it for, extended periods without any issues.
It's like buying a pair of shoes.
What do you mean?
Well, you can get a pair of shoes that look amazing, but if they're not comfortable, you're not going to wear them.
That's a good analogy. And it applies to welding PPE too. A comfortable welding helmet, for example, lets you focus on your work without distractions. And that means you're more likely to stay safe
So it's not just about checking off the boxes, it's about finding gear that you actually like wearing.
and that you can wear consistently without fidgeting or adjusting it all the time.
Comfort and safety go hand in hand.
Couldn't agree more.
All right, folks, that's it for part 2 of our welding safety and equipment deep dive. We've covered a lot, from the basic hazards to the importance of personal awareness, good communication, and finding PPE that fits you right. But we're not done yet. In part 3, we'll be exploring some specific welding techniques and diving into even more advanced safety protocols. So stay tuned. Welcome back. Ready to dive into some actual welding techniques?
Let's do it. I think this is where it gets really interesting, seeing how all those safety principles apply in real-life situations.
Totally. So let's start with a classic shielded metal arc welding, or STAR, MAW, what most folks just call stick welding.
Ah, the OG of welding techniques.
Yeah.
Still widely used today.
So safety-wise, what are the big things to keep in mind with SMA?
Well, SMA uses that consumable electrode coated in flux, right? And that creates the shielding gas as it burns.
Right, right. And I remember the sparks flying everywhere in the presentation images.
Yeah, SMA can be a bit of a spark show. Definitely got to have your PPE game on point. Heavy-duty helmet with the right shade lens, thick gloves, full coverage.
And ventilation, right. Got to get those fumes out of there.
Absolutely. Adequate ventilation is key. And depending on what you're welding, you might even need a respirator.
Right. Got to protect those lungs. So PPE, ventilation, anything else specific to SMAW?
Well, there's the arc starting, which can be tricky for beginners. If you don't do it right, you can end up sticking the electrode to the workpiece.
Oh, that doesn't sound good.
Nope, not good at all.
Mm-hmm.
You can cause a big surge of current, damage your equipment.
So it's not just about safety, it's about protecting your gear, too.
Exactly. Everything's connected.
Okay, so SMAW, got to master that arc starting. What about gas metal arc welding, or GMAW, MIG welding?
MIG, definitely one of the more popular techniques these days.
Safety-wise, how does it compare to SMAW?
Well, MIG uses a continuous wire electrode fed through the gun, and the shielding gas is supplied externally.
Right, so less splatter than SMAW.
Yeah, typically less splatter, but still plenty of heat and UV radiation, so you still need that PPE and ventilation.
Okay, no shortcuts there. But what about the shielding gas itself? Any special safety concerns with that?
For sure. Handling those gas cylinders properly is crucial, like we talked about earlier. Make sure they're secure, valves closed, all that good stuff.
Right, right. Got to treat those cylinders with respect.
Absolutely. And you also got to make sure you've got the right gas flow rate, not too low, not too high.
What happens if it's off?
Well, too low, and the weld might not be properly shielded. Too high, you can get turbulence in the weld pool, mess up the quality.
So it's a balancing act.
Yep, got to find that sweet spot.
Okay, let's switch gears again. What about gas tungsten arc welding, or GTAW, also known as TIG welding?
TIG. That's a precision technique.
So safety-wise, what's different about TIG?
Well, with TIG, you're using a non-consumable tungsten electrode, and the shielding gas is usually argon. But the arc is really intense, lots of UV radiation.
So even more important to protect your eyes with TIG.
Absolutely. You need a higher shade lens on your helmet, for sure.
Wow, okay. Anything else?
Well, TIG often involves working on thinner materials, doing those really fine welds, so you want gloves that give you good dexterity.
Oh, right. Like those thin, flexible ones we talked about.
Exactly. You need to be able to feel what you're doing.
Makes sense. And what about ventilation and all that with TIG?
Same deal. Good ventilation is key. But TIG can actually produce ozone, which is a harmful gas.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that.
Yeah. So make sure you've got good airflow or wear a respirator that can handle ozone.
So many things to consider. Okay, so we've covered SAMADA, GMAW, GTDA, lots of different techniques, different hazards.
Right. And it's important to remember that welding safety goes beyond just knowing the techniques.
Oh, for sure. It's about how you approach every welding job every single time.
Exactly. Got to develop those good habits, that safety-first mindset.
Okay, so what are some of those good habits that make a difference?
Well, always inspect your equipment before you start. Cables, hoses, connections. Make sure your machine is grounded properly.
Inspection, inspection, inspection. Seems like that's the key to everything.
It really is. Helps you catch those little problems before they turn into big ones.
That's smart. What else?
Keep your work area clean, organized. Clutter can be a hazard, tripping over things, not being able to reach your safety gear quickly.
Right, got to be able to move around freely.
Exactly. And wear your PPE, all of it. Even for those quick little jobs, it's easy to get lazy, but that's when accidents happen.
No shortcuts when it comes to safety.
None at all. And don't be afraid to ask for help if you're unsure about something. Better to be safe than sorry.
Couldn't agree more. So it's about personal responsibility, but also about everyone working together to create a safe environment.
Exactly. We're all in this together.
Well said. So I think we've covered a ton of ground in this deep dive into welding safety and equipment. We've gone over the hazards, the PPE, the different welding techniques, all the important stuff.
I feel like anyone listening to this has a solid foundation to start their welding journey safely and confidently.
I agree. And remember, this is just the beginning. There's a whole world of welding out there to explore. Stay curious, stay safe, and happy welding, everyone.